which dead celebrities are treated like saints, but were truly awful people when they were alive. Jerry Lewis, he treated his family like shit, cut his kids out of his will and was a real boss on set. Watch some clips on YouTube of him and his behavior. Terrible, most likely stemming from when he and Dean Martin split. From being Martin and Lewis, everyone thought Dean would disappear and Jerry would go on to be a massive star. As it turned out, it was the complete reverse. He was a bitter person. Frank Lloyd Wright, he is seen as a visionary in architecture, but he was a horrible person IRL. Raging narcissist, abandoned his wife and kids to run off with the wife of one of his clients, nailed down his selected furniture in a client's home because he didn't like what the client wanted, etc. It's probably come up time and again, but John Lennon was not a nice man. His son grew to despise him enough to tell Paul McCartney that he wished Paul was his father. I draw cartoons as a hobby. People are often surprised that I can draw real pictures. I want to scream. Knowing how to draw realistically helps me with cartoons, because I know how to do body proportions, facial expressions, hair texture, body language, fabric, and how to minimalize a complex drawing into cartoon form. I've known some people who are opposed to learning music theory because they don't want to be locked into those rules, but in reality knowing the rules of theory just helps you break them in more interesting ways. Bioinformatics is the art of being super lazy. Don't want to run more lab experiments to figure out a thing, just work out a novel way to analyze the data you already have from doing something else unrelated to the question at hand, or even someone else's data that you have lying around, or, as I like to remind my boss during budget discussions, lab work is expensive, computer time is cheap. So, I work in the culinary field. I spent several years in culinary school before training to become a chef, and now I run my own kitchen with about 30 employees under me. We serve between 300 and 500 people at lunch and dinner each day. Honestly, if I hadn't gone to learn all of the basics, like how to make a simple sauce, how to base my timing, and how to season food well, I never would have been able to get to a level where I'm at today. Nowadays, recipes are more like guidelines than anything else, except for baking, of course. Basically, I'll look at what's on the menu for the day, and I will know how to play with it and tease it and make it taste delicious, while still being within the nutrient and caloric guidelines. You can't ever play with stuff and become an artist if you don't learn how to draw in the first place. It's one of the things I love the most about my job, that I've been doing it for long enough now where I'm able to play with it really well. It's taken a decade to even get to this point, and I still have much further to go, but I'm thrilled with the progress I've made in that time alone. I do payroll. There's lots of ways to fix a payroll error, but only one correct way typically, and those usually involve amendments cause clients don't understand when the quarter closes and how taxes work. A very common lesson of contemporary marketing is that nearly every rule is breakable. For example, during testing, I often find that, unsurprisingly, the most optimal digital ad features an attractive young white woman, but you need to test every time, because last week my most successful ad featured a dude, facing away from the camera, doing a cartwheel. I'm a singer and vocal coach. You should never push your voice too high or loud to the point of your voice breaking or cracking, as it can cause damage. That being said, if you do it just right or just a little bit, it can make people cry or give a standing ovation if it's just at the right moment to evoke emotion, or even sometimes to cover weakness in your voice at a certain point of the song, enough to make it sound like a strength. I used to work in IT, and there is a skill to slacking off. It's a stressful environment, but when you kinda know what your performance targets are, You can game the system a little bit and do just enough work to fly under the radar and not be bothered much. Working from home has been such a treat for people working in IT. Offices are generally quite rude and abusive towards programmers and coders. D&D. Anyone who's played for a while can relate. You learn the rules as a new player, but get more relaxed as you play longer, especially when you're about to do a cool stunt of some kind, or you learn how to exploit them without breaking them. Dentist. Naturally, there's certain rules you don't ever break, but when it comes to cosmetics, aesthetics, you pretty much do become an artist that has to work within some mechanical boundaries. Go to grad school, become a professor. Now any idea you have or new methodology you want to implement is gonna be received with appreciation instead of a stick to the program, and it worked. I have been able to implement and experiment with a lot of new class styles in university. Working at a school, they always told me to stick to the methods the government suggests and do not experiment with new things, cause if it goes bad that means lost time. In my long career in IT so far, rules are in place to keep users, mainly, from doing something stupid, a bit like warning labels on products. Also, you'll see a spectrum of levels of talent when you gain expertise probably in most any field, and some will set up roadblocks or tests, especially in job interviews, to see whether you really know your shit or that you just freshly emerged from the A+ exam or agile workshop you went to a boot camp for over this past weekend. Gaining that level of pro-level skill for some can make them less a technician and more an artist, to Picasso's words. Yes, there is rote and slow and steady wins the race and textbook practices, but an artist tends to make non-linear intuitive hops on a path towards solving a problem where someone competent but not beyond that level of technical competence will perhaps be content, or afraid to not, do things variously by the book. I make bespoke clothing. Usually it doesn't involve design. I am a terrible designer, but it does involve a lot of creative problem solving. Because part of why clothing designed for one person looks terrible on another person comes down to the rules of fit and construction. Ergo, if I want to make something to spec that will fit and flatter my client and not make them look like a duck in a trash bag, I have to know how clothing is put together in order to know where I can hack and slash the pattern in order to get it to work, where to add, subtract, change shape, raise, lower, rearrange entirely. Only works when you know why it worked in the first place. Now take it up a notch. Cosplay. Video game designers drawing and animating costumes that do not work the way they work in animation, and now someone wants it to be real and fit their body. The amount of problem solving involved would break a lesser man. Now you're throwing not just the rules of making clothing into it, but the laws of physics, knowing what will still work if you fiddle with it, and what will absolutely not work because the laws of physics sadly cannot be broken, is right up Picasso's alley. Can I dye plastic with red dye? Surprisingly, maybe. Can I dye wet look PVC vinyl? Absolutely not. Can I build this coat without having any visible stitching on the outside? Damn right I can. Can I make the skirt look like it's floating and also hide the zipper? Probably, but it's going to cost you. Most fluid mechanics problems are too complex to solve for real applications, so you have to know the physics like the back of your hand to make assumptions or apply empirical equations appropriately. Same goes for most engineering. A good DM should learn the raw for the system they're playing so that they can make homebrew encounters/items/classes that don't ruin your game, and be able to make shit up on the fly that also doesn't just ruin your game. So many educations have off-label uses. When you learn educations you learn how to use them for specific properties, but so many educations have other uses and you pick these tips and tricks up as you go. being a teacher of any foreign language. The first thing they teach is that there is no one right method for teaching a language, so we basically learn as much foundational knowledge as we can so that we're able to mix and match and create new games and lesson plans. I look through the curriculum provided by the district thoroughly. I look at everything they want me to do in detail and then promptly disregard it. Most curriculum is teaching to a state test, and I loathe the state test. I prefer to teach them to think, and analyze and question. We just spent 3 days analyzing author's purpose, mood and character motivation by watching War of the Worlds. I'm a professional editor, proofreader. I used to format every casual text, DM with the utmost precision. Back in high school, I joked that improper punctuation gives me hives. What was I trying to prove? Who was I trying to impress? I'm 27 now and don't give a fuck. If it's not work-related, I let my thumbs be sloppy lil bitches be. See, I truly give zero fucks. Not 100% relevant. Never thought about it before now, though. In competitive Super Smash Bros. There are some things that are generally too aggressive and unsafe, but at a certain point it can be a good mix-up for the opponent who will say something like "I can't believe they would go for that" or "I can't believe he did that 4 times in a row." As a former musician who teetered on the edge of experimental music, this always got me. One band I was in had like 10 members at any given point, so we'd have to recruit horn players all the time from the local prestigious college music program. Some of them would come screeching and skunking their free jazz craziness but could not hold down a fat horn pocket to save their lives. We would always look at each other and wonder, how did these kids skip from jazz standards to Miles Davis without learning the basics of how, when to play? The old man in the band always said, "I hate the rules too, but you have to know them before you can break them." I haven't measured anything. I have cooked for a few years now. I have a general idea of how much a tablespoon/cup/etc. is and just eyeball it. Haven't had a single complaint. Please, aspiring cooks, measure your baking ingredients until you know what you're doing. More like an hobby, but it works for competitive Pokemon. If you can understand what would be the best course of action, and you are aware your opponent is too, you can plan on how to make a suboptimal, yet unexpected move and win the match by making seemingly bad plays. It's the same principle in cooking. Learn the basics to make stuff taste good. Learn how to cut an onion and sear a steak. Broaden your ability with various styles until you're comfortable with it. When you can do Italian, French, Vietnamese, BBQ, Mexican, Indian, to the point where everyone is always happy, then start screwing around with things and come up with your own recipes. It's real rewarding to have things unique to you that people rave about, especially when you are making a living off it. Source: I make people food professionally. Music theory, composition. Music majors will spend 2 years in music theory classes and typically another year in orchestration or form and analysis, all to just analyze pieces by Bach and these other great composers where they literally don't follow any of the rules. Can't have parallel fifths, Bach does. Can't use tritones in operatic songs, Wagner does with the Tristan chord. Shouldn't use dissonant melodies or 12-tone methods. Let me introduce you to Stravinsky and Schoenberg. Music theory is a lie. Pretty much everyone who learns music theory and composes themselves uses this motto. Even learning the history of music follows this. For example, whilst Bach did not create rules for himself, he composed in such a way that became the standard for his era. Debussy took all of those rules and the composers before him and stuck 2 fat middle fingers to it. He doesn't follow many rules. Hell, he didn't even like his music to be called music because he felt he was so above with his genius. A little arrogant, but I think Picasso would be proud. I work at an overdose prevention site, and for those who don't know, it's exactly what it sounds like, a site people can go do drugs at, and if they overdose we revive them using Narcan. With that being said, a million policies are in place so these sites can exist. Most people hate drug users and don't understand addiction is really just a side effect of the first world. Not that it doesn't exist in other countries, just significantly less. And Western societies are actually quite robotic and industrial. It makes sense why some people are on drugs. Anyways, half the time the people who work at these places come from their own experience, so when you're reviving life after life and breaking policy to meet the needs of other people, you kind of come to this thorough understanding that we are all just insignificant specks experiencing profoundly significant moments. And as someone who won't be remembered and works through an industry made up of policies, my only real goal in life is to support the complex and fluctuating process of the human experience. That's beautifully breaking the rules to me, I suppose. I'm a recovery support specialist, recovery coach. This means I have lived with the issues that face my people, so I guess in a way that's breaking rules right there, because professionals are not taught how to share their story, and sharing your story is an art form. I learned the rules of professional behavior: keep yourself to yourself, don't get personal, keep your distance, and then I do the opposite. I have boundaries, I have a code of ethics, I have professional standards, I get to show heart, empathy and understanding to people going through it because I lived it too. For math, I can say that one should learn the basics, but you need to be creative and clever, think outside the box maybe, to be successful in both academia or related fields. Because the rules they teach at school are mostly mediocre but are kept in course for pedagogical reasons. So to be great at any field of math, you need to explore the field yourself a lot. I'm somehow reminded of the book Smart Cuts by Shane Snow. I haven't gotten to the end yet, but somehow Shane's book touches on this concept. P.S. Yes, those who have read it can DM me and tell me if my assumption is a hit or a miss. D. Data science. Biomedicine. Sometimes I have to break the usual rules in order to solve problems stemming from suboptimal data, for example trying to circumvent one confounding factor by overutilizing another confounding factor with the opposite effect. So happy that I work with statisticians, otherwise I'll never be allowed to break anything. Confounding factor could be like age. If you look at a population that doesn't smoke but is on average 80 years old versus a smoking population with average 40 years, it'll seem like smoking protects against, for example, stroke, which is wrong. I used to work in a job that required some sales and you'd get a bonus if you sold something above street rate. This worked to incentivize some coworkers to upsell $10, $20, $30 so they could get a nice bonus. After a while I figured out that management didn't look at how much you upsell by, just the raw amount of upsells you have. Instead of snaking people out of an extra $20 or so, I would increase their price by exactly a penny, so it's something that likely doesn't make a difference to them and I still got my bonus. I'm a forklift operator, loading and unloading LTL freight. We are always told the driver needs to be able to move every skid with his pallet jack. Turning a standard pallet sideways saves about 8 inches of floor space that I might need later. I've found that in most cases, once the trailer is backed up to the customer, if they can't move the skid 95/100ths times, they are fine cutting the shrink wrap and unloading by hand. I try not to pick anything super heavy, or that has too many boxes, but every skid that I make fit on a trailer is another stop for the driver, and money in his pocket, and the consignee gets their stuff. Maybe it's a nursing home getting some basic supplies, or a bike shop getting some bikes, but they all want their stuff.